Let Grandpa settle in by the window where the rain taps softly like an old friend knocking. The lamp is low, the chair is warm, and the world outside is quiet now. Let me begin a brand new tale for tonight. Long ago, tucked deep inside the rolling hills of a sleepy village, there stood an ancient stone library that no one remembered building. It was the kind of place children whispered about during walks home from school, its towering windows always dark, and its heavy wooden doors sealed except on rainy days like this one. But the villagers never feared it. In fact, they rather liked knowing it was there, even if they never quite stepped inside. It was said that the library didn't just hold books. It held memories, tucked into the spine of each volume, guarded by something or someone. You see, no one truly worked there. No one was hired, and no one was ever seen opening or closing the doors. And yet, every time the skies darkened and the clouds wept gently over the earth, a warm glow would appear in the library's great front window, and the faintest scent of old pages and honeyed tea would drift out into the mist. On one such rainy evening, a boy named Lynn wandered too far from the market, following the curved stone path beyond the baker's hill, past the willow tree that always bent too low. He didn't mean to find the library, no one ever did, but as he turned the corner, there it was, rising tall and inviting, lit from within like a beacon in the fog. The door was open, just slightly, and curiosity, that most powerful of human urges, tugged gently at his coat sleeve. Lynn had heard the stories, of course. His grandmother used to tell them in hushed tones, always ending with a gentle laugh and a wink, as though even she wasn't quite sure what was real. But standing there now, cold rain dripping from his sleeves, the scent of warm parchment curling through the air, Lynn didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, and that's when the story truly began. The moment Lynn crossed the threshold, the door behind him closed with the softest sigh, as though the old library had been holding its breath just for him. He found himself standing in a grand entry hall lined with towering bookshelves that reached into darkness above, their tops swallowed by shadows no lantern could touch. The air smelled of time, warm wood, leather bindings, whispers left between pages. A golden glow came from somewhere deeper inside, beckoning him forward like a distant hearth. The sound of the rain faded into a muffled patter on stained glass windows, and beneath his feet the wooden floor creaked not in protest, but in greeting. Lynn's boots left damp footprints as he walked, yet not a single mark stained the floor. It was as if the library accepted the rain as part of him. He wandered past rows of books that bore no titles, only symbols carved into the spines, spirals, leaves, moons, eyes. Some books hummed faintly, and once, when he paused before a particularly large crimson volume, it gave off a tiny sigh, like it had just awakened from sleep. Lynn blinked, then chuckled nervously, thinking his imagination was running ahead of him. But the truth settled somewhere deep in his bones. This place was not a library in the way people thought. It was alive, and it had been waiting for someone like him. At the heart of the hall was a reading room, wide and round, with a tall glass dome that revealed a swirl of storm clouds above, though not a drop of rain touched the glass. In the center was a grand wooden table, and beside it a fire crackled in a hearth that had no chimney. Dozens of wing-back chairs surrounded the space, each one facing the table as if they were ready for a meeting. But only one chair was occupied. Sitting in it, was a figure dressed in robes of dark indigo and ash gray, their face hidden behind a mask made of stained wood. Not frightening, in fact, strangely calm. In one hand, the figure held a quill, in the other, an open book that shimmered like water. The figure looked up without alarm, and though Lynn could not see their face, he felt the warmth of a smile ripple through the air like heat from a teacup. "You're late," the figure said gently, voice like velvet and dust. "The library's been expecting you." Lynn hesitated at the edge of the reading room, unsure if he should speak or simply listen. The masked figure's voice had carried no menace, only patience, the kind that waits through centuries if need be. The golden fire behind the chair cast flickering shadows across the floor, and the masked figure gestured gracefully toward the seat across from them. Lynn obeyed without question, not out of fear, but because deep inside something told him this was a moment that would not come again. As he sat, the warmth of the fire settled around him like a blanket. He looked across the table and finally asked, "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they turned a page in the glowing book before them, and Lynn noticed something strange. His name was written at the top of the page. "I am the Watcher," the figure replied at last, "the keeper of stories that have not yet been written, and guardian of those too important to be forgotten." They ran a finger gently down the page, and Lynn swore he saw his own memories reflected in the parchment, scenes from his childhood, moments he hadn't recalled in years, all preserved in silver script. "This library," the Watcher continued, "doesn't lend books. It collects moments, choices, the quiet in-between seconds when hearts shift and lives change. That is why you are here." Lynn leaned closer, unable to look away from the page. "But I'm just a boy," he said. "I haven't done anything worth keeping in a book." The Watcher paused, then slowly removed their mask, and Lynn gasped, not in fear, but wonder, because beneath it the face was not one face, but many, layered and shifting like reflections on water. A grandmother's smile, a traveler's tired eyes, a child's tearful laugh. It was as though every story the Watcher had ever known lived within them. "You mistake importance for noise," they said softly. "Even the quietest choices ripple. Your story began long ago, and now it's time you turned the page." The glowing book slowly rotated until it faced Lynn, the words now unreadable to the Watcher, but clear to him. It was his path, not a prophecy, but a map of memories and doors yet unopened. His fingers trembled as he reached toward it. The room seemed to hush, the air thick with meaning. He didn't know where the story would take him, but something told him. Whatever it was, he was ready. As Lynn's fingertips brushed the glowing page, a warmth surged up his arm. Not a burning heat, but the kind of warmth that comes from being wrapped in thick blankets after a long day in the cold. The letters on the page lifted from the surface in glowing tendrils, like smoke caught in moonlight, curling gently into the air and weaving around him. Each word seemed to whisper, some in languages he didn't know, others in memories he'd forgotten. The Watcher remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold as it must, their hands folded calmly in their lap. The room around them shifted, not in space, but in feeling. The chairs no longer faced the table, they faced Lynn. The bookshelves leaned in slightly, as if listening, and then the floor beneath the boy trembled with the softest hum, like a harp string gently plucked somewhere deep beneath the library. The words wrapped around Lynn's shoulders, then trailed downward, forming a path of light across the floor, leading to a door that hadn't been there moments before. It was small and wooden, shaped like an archway, and covered in brass symbols, not carved, but grown into the wood, like veins in a leaf. Lynn turned back to the watcher. "Where does it lead?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. The watcher tilted their head. "To the moment you are meant to remember, or perhaps the one you've been trying to forget. The library does not choose what you see. It shows what you carry." They gestured again, not with urgency, but with trust. With one deep breath, Lynn stood. The path of letters pulsed beneath his feet as he walked. Each step forward sent a memory flickering across the walls. His first sketch drawn in the dirt behind the bakery, the time he got lost in the forest and found a wild dog that walked beside him until he found the road again, the gentle face of his grandmother whispering lullabies on stormy nights. The door opened without a sound, and beyond it was not a room, but a garden, vast, moonlit, and familiar. The scent of rain and lilacs filled his lungs, and the air shimmered like a dream just barely remembered. He stepped through, and behind him the watcher whispered to the fire, "The story has begun again." The moment Lynn stepped into the garden, a stillness settled over everything, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, like the hush before a symphony begins, or the quiet that follows a heartfelt goodbye. The garden glowed in silver tones beneath a low-hanging moon, each leaf dusted with mist, each flower blooming as if it had waited for him to arrive. Strange blossoms swayed gently without wind, their petals glowing softly in shades of lavender, blue, and pearl. A stone path curled through the garden like a question mark, leading toward a glassy pond at its heart. As Lynn walked forward, the gravel underfoot made no sound, and yet he could feel each step echoing in his chest, like he was walking not just through a place, but through time itself. The pond came into view, still as glass, perfectly round, and surrounded by a ring of weeping willows that draped their branches into its water, like fingers writing in ink. Lynn approached slowly, kneeling at its edge. When he peered into the reflection, he didn't see the garden behind him. He saw a room, his room, the small sunlit space he had once shared with his grandmother, filled with soft quilts, old books, and the quiet smell of cinnamon from her endless baking. In the reflection, he was young, perhaps 7, holding a wooden box he had long forgotten. He reached out to touch the surface of the water, and the reflection rippled, then shifted, and he was no longer looking into the past. Now he was inside it. The garden vanished. He stood again in that room, the faded curtains fluttering gently, the warmth of the hearth against his cheek, the sound of the rain tapping at the roof in the exact rhythm it had back then. On the bed lay his grandmother, reading aloud from a storybook, her voice as soft and musical as he remembered. But what made Lynn's heart tremble was the way she looked at him, not with surprise, not with confusion, but with joy, as if she had known all along that this moment would return to them. "You're just in time, little wanderer," she said, patting the seat beside her. "I saved your favorite part." And somehow Lynn knew this was not a memory to be observed. This was a moment to be lived again. Lynn moved slowly across the familiar room, each step feeling like a breath between heartbeats. He reached the edge of the bed and sat down beside his grandmother, the quilted blanket beneath him, just as he remembered, soft worn, and smelling faintly of thyme and lemon balm. The storybook rested in her lap, thick and old, with frayed edges and a faded cloth cover embroidered with the image of a stag standing beneath a crescent moon. Her hands, still gentle and wrinkled with time, turned the page as she spoke in that warm, melodic voice that had once been the lullaby of his world. Once, she read, in a land where the stars hung low and whispered secrets to the trees, there lived a boy who carried a map not drawn in ink, but in dreams. Lynn closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of her words wrap around him like a blanket. He remembered this story. He had heard it 100 times. But tonight, it was different. As she read, the walls of the room softened, the firelight flickered, and the air thickened with magic. Not the kind that casts spells, but the kind that makes you feel truly safe. Every word she spoke carried not just meaning, but memory. Lynn could feel his younger self stir within him, the boy who had once clung to this story as his anchor on lonely nights. His grandmother paused only once, looking over at him with eyes so full of kindness they seemed to see through all the years that had passed. "Do you remember what comes next, my heart?" she asked gently. Lynn nodded slowly. "The boy follows the wind," he whispered, "even when the path disappears." She smiled, kissed his forehead like she used to, and turned the page. But this time, the story didn't continue. Instead, the words melted off the paper and swirled around them, forming glowing lines in the air, a path of text leading out of the room, winding upward through the ceiling and beyond. Lynn stood, breath caught in his chest. His grandmother touched his hand, her grip soft but sure. Stories don't end, little one. They grow with you. You have a journey still waiting. And just like that, the room began to fade, not vanish, but blend gently into light and wind and the scent of rain. Lynn looked down and found the old storybook now in his hands. Its pages were blank, waiting. He stepped into the trail of glowing words and began to follow them into the unknown. Lynn followed the trail of floating words through a sky of soft twilight, as though walking a staircase woven from stardust and memory. Each step felt both weightless and solid, the way dreams sometimes do, just real enough to ground you, but always threatening to drift away. Below him, the world he knew dissolved into gentle fog, and above him, the path stretched toward a distant glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The storybook in his hands, once blank, now began to fill itself slowly as he walked, not with ink, but with living memory. Scenes from his life danced faintly across the pages. The first time he'd tied his own shoes, the quiet joy of baking bread with his grandmother, the secret he once whispered into a hollow tree that no one else ever knew. These were the small things, the quiet moments often forgotten, but here they glowed like lanterns in the night. The words led him into a realm unlike any he had ever imagined, a sky garden floating in mid-air, filled with bridges made of braided branches and platforms shaped like giant leaves. Fireflies the size of marbles drifted lazily in the air, and a warm wind carried the scent of lavender and old wood smoke. At the center of it all stood a tree taller than any he'd seen, its trunk wide as a house, and its bark carved with glowing script that flowed like water. This, Lynn somehow knew, was the heart-root tree, the anchor of the library's magic, the place where stories were born, nurtured, and sometimes ended. The trail of words led him to the base of the tree, where a small wooden door waited. carved with the same swirling symbols he had seen on the mysterious books back in the reading room. Without hesitation, he opened it. Inside, he found a small chamber wrapped in roots and vines, with one narrow window that looked out into stars. In the center was a pedestal, and on it rested a mirror, not of silver, but of still water framed in golden branches. Lynn stepped forward and looked into it, and this time what he saw wasn't the past or the present. It was a possibility, a glimpse of who he could become if he let the story continue. He saw strength, fear, hope, and sorrow all tangled together, not a perfect version of himself, but a true one. And behind that reflection, he saw the watcher just standing there, quietly waiting. Lynn blinked. He was no longer in the sky garden. He was back in the library. But everything had changed. The library no longer whispered like it had before. Now it sang, not with voices or melodies, but with the resonance of something deeply awake. As Lynn stood once more in the great hall, he noticed that the shadows had retreated. The chandeliers above, which once held a faint golden glow, now burned with soft silver blue light, casting patterns of constellations onto the wooden floors. The books, once silent and still, moved ever so slightly on their shelves, shifting, breathing, as if they were turning their own pages. The great walls no longer seemed like walls, but windows into other stories, shimmering portals of lives not yet lived or long since forgotten. Lynn clutched the storybook to his chest, now warm and pulsing like a heart, the blank pages humming with possibility. He turned and found the watcher standing beside him once more, mask restored. Yet Lynn no longer felt intimidated by the mystery. He saw it for what it was, a face worn not to hide, but to hold every story without judgment. "You've walked a path few ever find," the watcher said, "and you've seen what many turn away from, that the smallest memories are the roots of the greatest truths." Lynn looked down at the book in his hands. "What happens now?" he asked. The watcher lifted a hand, and the air before them shimmered until it revealed a single doorway, tall, arched, and woven entirely from golden thread that moved like water caught in sunlight. "Now," they said gently, "you decide what kind of story you want to carry forward." As Lynn approached the door, his heart began to beat with a rhythm he hadn't felt before. Not fear, not excitement, but purpose. The door didn't open on its own. It waited, alive, sensing his readiness. He placed his palm on its surface, and for a breathless moment, everything, the rain beyond the walls, the glow of the shelves, the watcher's presence, fell into perfect stillness. Then, with a sound like wind through tall grass, the door unraveled, thread by thread, revealing a corridor of light that stretched into the unknown. Lynn turned back just once, and the watcher inclined their head. "Your story has always belonged to you," they said, "but now you know how to tell it." With that, Lynn stepped through the light, and the library behind him gently faded, not disappearing, but becoming part of him. As Lynn stepped through the doorway woven from golden thread, he was enveloped in light that felt more like memory than radiance, warm, weightless, and full of quiet knowing. The corridor was not a place, but a passage through something deeper, his own self, his past, and the story he was becoming. The world around him shifted not with scenery, but with feelings. The scent of his grandmother's biscuits wafted by, the echo of his own laughter as a child skipping stones on a pond returned to him, and even the loneliness he had carried like a quiet backpack on silent afternoons pressed gently at his shoulders. But none of it felt heavy any more. Instead, it was as if each piece, each ache and joy, had found its place in the tapestry he now carried. The corridor gently unfurled into a clearing, a new place, unfamiliar, yet deeply welcoming. It looked like no place Lynn had ever been, and yet held hints of everywhere he had known. A river curving gently like the one near his village. Trees bearing golden leaves like those in the books he used to draw. And above all, a sky filled with threads of light stretching into constellations shaped like letters and symbols. In the center of the clearing stood a single table made of weathered oak, and on it a stack of blank pages bound with deep blue ribbon. There was a quill beside it, long, sleek, and tipped with silver, glinting under the celestial canopy. He stepped forward, breath slow, heart steady. When he touched the quill, it felt alive in his hand, as if recognizing him. He looked at the empty page, then back at the trail that had led him here. And he knew, not with panic, not with hesitation, but with certainty, that it was time to write. Not a story he had been told, not a path that had been decided for him, but the one only he could create. He dipped the quill into nothing, into the air itself, and began to write. The letters glowed softly, weaving themselves into shapes that shimmered, then settled. His story, his way forward. From somewhere behind him, the voice of the watcher echoed gently. The library is not a building, child. It is you. Lynn wrote as if the words had always been waiting inside him, merely asleep beneath the surface of his breath. Each stroke of the silver-tipped quill flowed not with ink, but with memory and hope, a soft shimmer that settled into the page like morning mist. The quiet around him was rich, not empty, but full, like the hush between notes in a lullaby. As he wrote, the world responded. The stars above shifted subtly, forming new constellations shaped like scenes from his journey. The great heartroot tree, the masked watcher, the fire-lit library, and his grandmother's warm smile. The wind changed, not in temperature, but in tone, carrying whispers of languages that felt like dreams he hadn't dreamed yet. And beneath his feet, the ground pulsed gently, as if the earth itself were listening to his story and rooting it into something eternal. When Lynn paused, the clearing remained still, yet he could feel its attention, the hush of the universe leaning in. He looked at what he had written, pages filled not with perfection, but with honesty. Parts of it were jagged, uncertain, moments where his hand had trembled or the page had blurred with emotion. But every word rang true. That was the difference. This was not a tale crafted to impress or persuade. It was his. As he set the quill down, the blue ribbon around the stack of pages tightened on its own, binding the story like a promise. A soft glow surrounded the manuscript, and Lynn felt it sink gently into his chest, becoming part of him, not as a burden, but as a compass. The clearing dimmed into twilight, and before him another doorway bloomed into view. This one wasn't woven or carved. It was open space shaped by light and calm, inviting him forward without pressure. He turned back for one last glance, not in longing, but in gratitude, and whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure to whom, the library, the watcher, his grandmother, or perhaps even to himself. Then, barefoot and unafraid, Lynn stepped through, and this time he did not arrive in a library or a garden or a skylit path. He arrived home, but not the home he left behind, the home he had grown into, The home Lynn stepped into was unlike any he had known before, not built of stone or wood, but of memory, meaning, and gentle belonging. It looked at first glance like a cottage, with warm lanterns in the windows and ivy curling lovingly around the edges. The path to its door was lined with glowing pebbles, each one softly pulsing with a color from Lynn's past. The amber of his grandmother's tea, the emerald of his forest sketchbook, the soft blue of a forgotten lullaby. The door opened without a touch, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the air wrapped around him like a wool blanket just out of the sun. Inside, everything felt lived in, like a story that had been told many times and had grown wiser with each retelling. The walls were lined with shelves, but these held no books. Instead, they carried small jars of memory, tiny bottles filled with flickering light, each one a scene, a heartbeat, a choice. He reached for one labeled, "The First Time I Was Brave," and as he held it up to the light, it showed him a vision. A much younger Lynn standing up for another boy who was being teased, even though his voice had shaken and his knees had knocked. Another bottle, "The Day I Understood My Grandmother's Silence," swirled with gentle blue mist, and he remembered the afternoon they sat without speaking, watching the rain, and how that silence had felt more comforting than any word. These weren't grand adventures or glorious triumphs. They were truths, the kind that shape a soul. In the corner of the room sat a hearth where the fire danced not with flames, but with images, old stories flickering like shadows across the wall, and above it hung a mirror. When Lynn approached, he didn't see his reflection. He saw the versions of himself that had grown from every choice. The Lynn who stayed quiet, the Lynn who wandered farther, the Lynn who listened, the Lynn who loved. They were all part of him, each one a thread in the fabric of his becoming. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel scattered or small. He felt whole. He sat down in a chair shaped like a question mark and curled his feet beneath him. There was no watcher now, no guiding hand, no whisper of what should come next. Only him. And that was enough. Evening settled gently across the sky outside Lynn's new home, casting long rays of lavender and gold through the round windows. Inside, the cottage glowed with a peaceful hush, the kind that wraps around your shoulders and makes your breath fall slower, deeper. Lynn sat by the hearth, the soft shadows of memory still dancing across the walls, but now slower, like the final pages of a story drifting to their end. He had no desire to move, no need to question where he was or what might come next. For the first time in a very long time, stillness did not feel like waiting. It felt like presence. On a small table beside him, the storybook he had filled now rested with its ribbon gently curled as if asleep. Beside it sat a small teacup, warm to the touch, though he hadn't seen it poured. He picked it up, sipped slowly, and the taste was everything gentle, cinnamon, honey, and something soft and unnameable, like love remembered. As the fire whispered quietly, Lynn turned his gaze to a wooden chest tucked beneath the window. It hadn't been there earlier, or perhaps he had not noticed it until now. He knelt before it and opened it slowly, half expecting more books or bottles of memory. But instead, there was only a single, neatly folded letter on thick parchment. His name was written across it in that unmistakable, looping handwriting, his grandmother's. His throat tightened as he opened it, and though no voice spoke aloud, her words echoed in his heart. "My dearest Lynn, You found your way, as I always knew you would. The library never calls the wrong soul. It brings home the ones who need to remember, not just who they were, but who they are becoming. Your path may take you far again. Life does that. But you carry home inside you now, and wherever you go, the stories you write will light the way for others. So rest here tonight, my little bird. Breathe deep, dream well, with all my love, Grandma. Tears came freely then, not sad, not bitter, just soft and grateful. Lynn closed the letter and held it to his chest as the fire crackled, the room hummed, and the stars outside leaned a little closer, as if to listen to the stillness that followed. Night deepened outside Lynn's quiet home, and the stars blinked softly in the wide, endless sky, not distant, but close, like the eyes of old friends watching gently from above. The hearth had dimmed to a soft, glowing ember, casting just enough light to warm the wooden walls with amber hues. Lynn sat in silence, the letter still pressed to his chest, and in that stillness something shifted, not around him, but within. For so long he had wandered in search of answers, of meaning, of where he belonged. And now, with no grand revelation or sudden flash of truth, he understood. Belonging wasn't a place or a person or a perfect version of himself. It was the quiet knowing that his story mattered, not because it was louder than others, but because it was his. He stood and walked slowly to the window where the softest wind carried the scent of old pages, sweet earth, and the last bloom of summer. In the sky above, constellations he didn't recognize, new stories, had taken shape. They weren't written by stars, but by him, each choice and memory stitched into the night. And in the very center of the sky, above the tallest tree, the watcher's mask shimmered faintly, not as a warning or a symbol of mystery, but as a reminder. Someone had believed in his story all along. With a small smile and a heart so full it no longer ached, Lynn turned from the window. The house did not vanish. The library did not fade. Nothing ended. Instead, everything settled. Everything rested. He returned to his chair, pulled the storybook onto his lap, and opened it once more. But this time he did not write. He simply held it. A promise, a beginning, a soft, golden silence. And as the wind curled beneath the door and the night tucked its arms around the world, Lynn finally closed his eyes, not because he was lost or weary, but because he was home. Even though Lynn had closed his eyes, something within him remained quietly awake, not in the restless way that keeps you turning under blankets, but in the sacred way that stays open to wonder, even in sleep. In the hush of night, his dreams did not come in pictures or sounds, but in feelings. He floated through moments of laughter, the deep comfort of his grandmother's embrace, the sense of standing at the edge of something vast and beautiful with no fear at all. Somewhere in that softness, he walked again through the glowing corridors of the library, but this time as if it were his own heartbeat guiding the halls. The books nodded as he passed. The watcher, or maybe just the idea of them, smiled from the edge of a dream and said nothing. They didn't need to. Lynn already knew. He wandered through a garden of memory where the flowers sang gently in a language made of wind, and the stars overhead blinked with each step he took. The storybook from before appeared again, this time floating beside him, its ribbon unwound and fluttering with a life of its own. Lynn reached for it, and as his fingers touched the cover, the garden shimmered like sunlight on water, not disappearing, just changing. A new page waited, a blank beginning, And even in sleep, even in the quiet cradle of rest, he understood. This story was not about endings or beginnings. It was about returning again and again to the places within us that feel like home. And somewhere, far off in the waking world, the rain continued to fall, soft and steady, like applause for a tale well told. And so, as the dream curled gently like smoke rising from a quiet chimney, Lynn awoke with a breath that felt like morning light. The warmth of the cottage greeted him once again, unchanged, as though it had waited patiently while he traveled far beyond its walls. The fire in the hearth still glowed with the softest amber. The storybook still rested on the table beside him, and outside the round window the rain whispered calmly, not as a storm or a weight, but as a lullaby sung by the world itself. Lynn rose slowly, stretching his arms with a small smile, not because everything was perfect, but because he had come to understand something deeper than answers. That peace comes not from knowing where the path ends, but from trusting the steps beneath your feet. He wandered out to the doorstep, where the ivy rustled with the breeze and the sky was just beginning to blush with dawn. The clouds had softened into silver trails, and the earth smelled clean, renewed. Lynn closed his eyes one last time and whispered into the breeze, "Thank you." And in that moment, he felt the world whisper back. No thunder, no magic, no flash, just the quiet, powerful knowing that he was part of something vast, beautiful, and gently unfolding. He stepped back inside and poured himself a cup of tea, letting the steam rise around his face like a gentle farewell. He didn't need to go anywhere else today. The journey had come home to him. And now, dear listener, as the rain patters softly outside your own window and your breath begins to slow, Grandpa wants you to remember this. Your story is just as precious. The little moments, the soft ones, the quiet victories, they are pages too. And tonight, maybe your dreams will take you to a garden of memory, or a library filled with stars, or simply back to the warmest place in your heart. So tuck in now, close your eyes. You've listened well, and the world is quieter for it. As the fire dims to its last gentle flicker, and the rain outside hums like a lullaby written just for you, Grandpa leans back in his old chair, blanket over his knees, and smiles quietly to himself. "That's all for tonight, my dear," he whispers in that slow, comforting voice, the kind that wraps around you like a warm quilt. "You've traveled far, listened well, and now it's time to let go, just for a while. The world will still be here in the morning, full of new paths and pages. But for now, there's nothing more to do, nothing more to carry. Just breathe in and let it all drift away. May your dreams be kind and your heart be light. Grandpa's right here if you ever need another story. Until then, good night, little one. Sleep in peace."